Welcome to Literacy Mindset, where education leaders from across the country share strategies for improving K-12 instruction today and preparing for the challenges of tomorrow. The stakes are high. Students are facing new academic demands, and educators are navigating an ever-changing educational landscape. Each episode, we explore the most effective literacy initiatives, innovative tools, and strategies that are reshaping education. Whether you're an educator looking to improve student outcomes or passionate about driving meaningful change in schools, the Literacy Mindset brings you the insights and strategies you need to stay ahead. This is where education leadership meets real-world impact.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Another episode of the Literacy Mindset podcast. I'm really excited about my guest today, Dr. Daniel McGarry, Superintendent of Schools, and Ed Marshaleck, Assistant Superintendent of Student Services at the Upper Darby School District in Pennsylvania. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on here. Although it would be fun to talk Eagles and a Super Bowl victory, we'll probably stay more to the reading and literacy side of the world today. Would you mind, Dan, if you wouldn't mind starting us out? Just give us a little intro about you and kind of what helped you find yourself in the seat you're in today.
Yeah, sure. Dan McGarry, Superintendent of Schools, obviously Upper Darby School District, going into almost my 25th year in education. All but 3 of those years were spent right here in the Upper Darby School District.
Awesome.
I started my career as a high school teacher, and then from there worked my way to become, I worked at 2 different school districts as a high school teacher, an assistant principal at a middle school, and then an elementary school principal, and then became assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction in this district. And then have been fortunate enough and really blessed to have earned the opportunity over the past 7 years to be the superintendent of the school district. So, I'm a graduate of this school district, so there's a lot of pride that comes with having earned this opportunity. So, I guess there's a connection with being from around here and coming here that I think it really helped me afford me this opportunity.
That's great. We'll talk a little bit more about that here soon. All right, Ed, how about you?
Ed Marshaleck, Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. This is my 21st year in education. I had a very small, short career in finance right after college. My bachelor's degree is actually in finance. I decided that it wasn't really the right fit for me, so I went back to school and got my certification to teach elementary school and special education. Started out as a first grade teacher at Bywood Elementary School in this school district. Actually started as a building sub initially and then worked my way up to getting my first teaching job as a first grade teacher. Taught 3rd grade, taught 4th grade, was a literacy coach at the same building, and then eventually became principal of that building, Bywood Elementary School. From that point, went on to be the director of special education for a couple of years, and then my current role as assistant superintendent for student services. But as Dan mentioned, I have a connection to Upper Darby. My mom worked here for a long period of time before I took over, teaching at Bywood Elementary. I grew up right down the road in a township right next door. We were rivals with Upper Darby. Our school district. So I have a very strong connection to the township and to the school district, and very fortunate to be where I am today.
I love that. I love you were rivals in high school and now are coming together to serve students collectively. Dan, can you just tell us a little bit more? Obviously, being an alumni of the district and growing up here, tell us a little bit more about Upper Darby in general.
Yeah, so Upper Darby School District really borders a couple different communities and areas, but predominantly known as being on the outskirts of Lansdowne area and Philadelphia, very, very close to those communities. And as a result, it's always been kind of a resettlement area for a lot of different communities. Historically, one time, students from Vietnam, students from the Middle East, students from a lot of Greek population of students at one time. Mm-hmm. So as a result of that, Upper Darby is literally, the place in one world that you can find just about every different type of language, culture here in the school district. I was just down in an elementary school reading today to 5th graders where we both worked at one time, Ed and I, and there's a Greek woman there that does the attendance, and she wanted me to pass along that Ed was her favorite principal. I worked there as the principal, but Ed was her favorite principal.
Hey, you can't win them all.
Kathy Papaziaris, but the history is rich in culture and diversity in the school district. Okay. And as a result of that, we've been blessed, over 12,000 students, close to 13,000 students in the district. one very large comprehensive high school where there's over 4,000 students in one high school, over 2,300 EL students, over 2,300 special education students, 80 to 90 different languages spoken depending on the week or the day, literally in the school district. It's a very, very richly diverse and beautiful place. And that's benefited us. Some communities have struggled with some diversity. It's a strength of ours. It's obviously complicated, our school district, from a funding standpoint and a wealth standpoint. But we're lucky that we have the diversity that we have too. That's really what makes it a special place.
Yeah, I love that. I love being able to embrace the diversity that is found within the district. Let's talk about it now, maybe through the lens of literacy. It's the literacy mindset. We talk a lot about reading here, reading instruction. We talk about intervention. But let's just get a sense for maybe today, despite the benefits of the student population that you have, maybe what are some of the biggest challenges as it relates to reading and reading proficiency in the district today?
Yeah. So for our school district, obviously literacy is a huge, huge focus, especially at the elementary school level. We all know, I learned, when I went down to an elementary school. In my high school background, I never knew until I went to see Ed teach first grade, literally, what it took to become a first grader and how to teach kids how to read. So there's definitely a skill set that's involved there. Creatively, what we've done as a school district is try to resurrect our once very strong and robust MTSS program. And we've had to get creative in order to do that, because in the mid-2000s, we were one of the best in the state, I would argue in the country, of having a multi-tiered system of support. We had reading interventions, we had coaches. When I was a principal at Bywood, where Ed took over, I had 4 coaches. I had 2 math coaches, two reading coaches in the building who were dedicated to that, 8 to 9 reading specialists in the building, and about 10 or 11 hourly tutors that came in. So we were running small group instruction of 3 to 5 kids in tier 3. We were running the model, the ideal model.
Yeah, it was like how you would draw it up.
Yeah, and then obviously the finances here in the state of Pennsylvania, there was funding cuts that took place, and they really hit this school district extremely hard. And as a result of that, we've had to rebuild ourselves. We went from a place where, under old standards, they were known as Pennsylvania legacy standards. Both of our middle schools were about 78 to 80% proficient in reading. And so it's been a hard area to pick up for us, especially post-COVID now. So that's a concern. And then, finding good qualified people and keeping them. People going into this profession has been a challenge for us. But we have some good, really solid systems and structures in place, how we identify students and their needs. We're rebuilding our intervention programs again, checking data to move students and intentionally moving students into one intervention and out of another. And we really have those systems. We're rebuilding that. And we're leveraging some new artificial intelligence reading technology that we have that we're using that allows kids that are EL students or students that are struggling at home with some supports to be able to practice those skills outside of school in a way that's not overwhelming for checking for their understanding. And so, I'm sure Ed can give you a little bit of background as a first grade teacher, but our focus is to get students on grade level or as close to grade level by the spring of first grade. So we go from, obviously learning how to read to then by the end of second grade, making sure we're flipping the switch to using reading to learn. And that's a heavy lift. I don't know that a lot of educators know that the window of time that you have is so strategic and so important that really from kindergarten until the end of second grade, you really have to make significant inroads with kids on their oral reading fluency, their accuracy, their word recognition, and it's a very, very heavy lift from that period of time. And when we're so transient, we get kids to a certain place, and if we just had 6 more weeks of school, or maybe 3 or 4 people, we could kind of close that gap. And there are some of the issues that we face. Okay.
Yeah, and Ed, that's a good point. Being a first grade teacher yourself, just maybe orient the group to some of the stuff that Dan was just talking about. Like, what are the key things that have to happen at that first grade, kindergarten, first grade level to make sure that they are set up sort of in the preventative side of the world? And then we'll talk maybe a little bit about intervention.
Sure. I mean, look, one of the biggest things is the value of a really good primary teacher to be in front of kids. And what I mean by that is people that know the background of reading, the science of reading, know what sounds mean, how to make the correct sounds. If you think about it, you have these little guys sitting in front of you, and they're looking up at you, and they're taking after what you're modeling for them. So if you're mispronouncing words, if you're mispronouncing phonemes, if you're not segmenting words the proper way, because maybe you don't fully understand what that looks and sounds like, those little kids are picking up on what you're teaching them just by hearing you. So I think the importance that are put on those primary teachers is so much. I think the responsibility, which people might not always recognize, is so great at the elementary level, especially in first and second and third grade. That it's just you can't get a better teacher and put them in the right spot at those grade levels. But at the same time, we also have to recognize too that kids also grow at different paces.
Right.
So some kids might take a little bit longer of a time to get to where we want them to be. But without that core instruction at that, in particular, first grade level, it really sets the students back, significantly by missing out on those opportunities.
Right.
But again, kind of going back to being a prepared teacher and ready to instruct the little kids on how to read is really the biggest thing. To get them prepared to then reading to learn, which is the next phase of the elementary school.
Yeah, and a good foundation is critical to that. Let's maybe spend a minute or two talking about what happens beyond that. Maybe if a gap did develop, or whether it's a transient population, somebody enters the district with a gap. Particularly, I think, in grades 4 through maybe 7th or 8th, right? There are times in which there are students in a classroom of a 7th grade English or language arts teacher, and they are missing phonics skills. They're like phoneme segmentation is something that they're still struggling with. How do you adequately support a 7th grade teacher that may not have learned, some of the importance of those foundational skills, and how do you help that environment? Do you bring somebody else in? Do you kind of go through extra training on that? Is there anything you can share on that front?
Yeah, our middle schools, one middle school in particular, Drexel Hill Middle School in 2005, 2006, was recognized by the RTI National Network as one of the model learning sites. Now, this is going back when the funding was good and you could get a substitute teacher and you had 40, 50 applicants for one job. Those days are not here any longer. But what we used to do, what Ed talked about before I moved to Bywood, why it was easier for me to be a secondary person and work at an elementary school is because our elementary schools were doing so much better at that time that the middle schools had to keep the work up. So we had to become just as good at reading. So I learned things like the Scarborough's reading rope. I'm sure you're familiar with Scarborough.
Right.
And we were training our teachers on multiple reading interventions. So I, as a middle school assistant principal who was a high school teacher, learned naturally, corrective reading, studied those interventions. And we were all trained in anything from Great Books, which is an outstanding program, all the way down to corrective reading, which is decoding, multisyllabic words, which became complicated. As you understand, I'm sure, Jeff, at a middle school level, reading is motivation. So kids at a middle school who might struggle with reading, but they'll recognize that, you're treating me like a child. Right. So there's a switch there where you have to make sure that you're not insulting middle school students with what you're teaching them to keep them motivated. And that was one of the hardest things we had to overcome at a middle school, and we still do to this day, is finding the time in your schedule, which is a big deal. If you work on literacy in a public school, the schedule dictates how you make it work. So we have set aside time in our middle school schedule, in our elementary school schedule for literacy improvement and math improvement. 2 periods of time in the middle school and a period of time in the elementary school where it's strictly focused on literacy and numeracy skill development. We do have to train teachers on that. There are far more, believe it or not, I'm sure literacy interventions than there are math interventions.
Right.
But if a middle school student literally needs decoding, they receive decoding. They receive that level of support at a middle school level.
That's a great point that you bring up too. I think that sometimes on this show and generally in the discourse of education, we can focus a lot on the pedagogical side of the world, right? Like how we're teaching this. But you just brought up, like, sometimes there's a time and an implementation side of this that clearly can have an influence on our pedagogical desires. How do you find the right blend of being, purely focused on the right pedagogy while also trying to maintain like what does the schedule dictate? What are we even allowed to do?
Yeah, so we've had to change our middle school schedule several times over the last couple of years. The reason why we've had to change it in some respects, we went from a true middle school schedule. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I don't want to bore your listeners, which had team time,
right,
and then prep time. We had to eliminate the team time. We just couldn't afford it anymore. So those teachers picked up an additional period of time. And that became complicated because now they're covering more classes, their ability to prep, their ability to get training. It's just more complicated to make that happen. It's become very, very onerous and very difficult. But from a leadership standpoint, literacy is the driving factor in everything that we do. You can't do well in math because math has become more complicated, and there's definitely more showing and reading what you're doing. So we still have a very serious, heavy emphasis on literacy. We've readopted a program called Reading Apprenticeship. I don't know if you're familiar with Reading Apprenticeship. The idea of having metacognitive conversations, that sounds so fancy, but really talking to the text. So when you're reading at a middle school and high school level, to keep that motivation going, asking yourself questions, what's the author's purpose, writing in the margin, looking for context clues in the paragraph, teaching our teachers how to teach that to kids. We're literally talking to our adults in our building about how do you have metacognitive conversations when you read, and then our kids have to learn how to have metacognitive conversations as they read. So talking to the text when they're reading at a middle school and high school level, and that transfers down to the elementary school, is the turnaround training we've adopted to help overcome some of the other issues that we have related to, getting the time in. We used to have full day, Jeff, data meetings 4 times a year, where we could bring in subs and have 6th grade teams talk about just their kids and moving their kids. 7th grade, 8th grade. We used to do it at the high school. Our elementary schools could have 1st grade teachers all in the same room. We would get subs. We'd give them half the day off, and they would just talk about each kid and move kids around. We don't have the funding anymore, and we don't have the subs to even do it. So we've had to get more creative with how we have pulled our resources, and we move our students, and we look at our data at a more centralized level.
That's awesome. I do think that out of unfortunate circumstances, which funding declines can be described nothing other than unfortunate circumstances, can drive innovation if you let it. And it sounds like you guys are doing some pretty incredible things there. Let's talk broadly about technology. How do you think about technology in the district? Sounds like maybe that could be one of the driving forces to help scale the quality teachers that you do have. But maybe just give us an overarching view of that. And I think we talked in the pre-meeting about sort of the evolution from 3-to-1 to 1-to-1. Maybe orient the audience to that as well.
Yeah, I'll take some of this, and then Ed can jump in from the special ed work that he does, leveraging technology and the data points that we use. So, from a school district standpoint, technology-wise, we are now fully online 1-to-1. I was sharing with you, Jeff, previously that literally overnight when COVID hit, we were a district where we had 3 students that could share one device, if we were lucky. At that time. And our internet was kind of choppy at the time, for lack of a better term. We didn't have the greatest technology in the school district. And we literally overnight moved to a 1-to-1 school district. All of our teachers have, clear touch boards in all of their classrooms, which is unbelievable interactive. They can flip the technology down. They can do math on it. Our kids are using it. So we are technology driven. We have cameras in all of our classrooms. So our teachers both teach 3 different instructional models. Kids can be asynchronous, which is independently working, and work is uploaded in one of our
recorded lessons are recorded. Okay.
And then we have live instruction, synchronous instruction for kids that might be out on medical homebound. So we're leveraging technology that way, so kids don't miss a beat, hopefully. And then we also have used kind of artificial technology, such as literacy, such as Amira, Waggle, other literacy skills that we're working with our kids outside so that parents aren't overwhelmed, especially our EL parents, and kids can practice those skills 10 to 15 minutes a day is all we're really asking. Just keep pressure on 10 to 15 minutes a day of literacy and math outside of the classroom, and make it a fun competition that each school that's doing this work, we kind of keep score on what it looks like. But technology's been a fine line coming out of COVID too. Obviously, a lot of school districts, even here locally, are saying, Now they're having days where there's no technology on at home. But I will tell you, here in Upper Darby, a lot of our families rely on the technology we've given kids even outside of school. So it's complicated. It's a balancing act with everything that we do. Now, we don't allow kindergarten through 8th grade cell phones to be out in the school day, because now that we have these Chromebooks in everybody's hands, we've limited and actually reduced cell phone allowances in our middle schools and elementary schools, which we've seen a very positive trend with. And Ed and his team really helped pull that off. But technology is a big part of what we do, and I don't think you could totally avoid it. Social media is a different part of that, but as far as leveraging technology from artificial intelligence with kids and keeping up with that, I think that's here to stay, and we're going to have to continue to navigate that. Ed?
Yeah, and I agree. I think that we'd be foolish to turn our back to technology, kind of push back against as much as people might want to do it. Right. I think the fear of understanding technology and how to implement it properly in the classroom, I think, might be one of the driving forces behind that, if there is any pushback out there. But from the special education world, we had to figure out back in COVID how we're going to support our most needy learners who are at home. You can't be in front of a teacher all day long either on a device going back and forth. So we leverage a couple opportunities with Unique Learning, with some other web-based supports to provide instruction to our students who are the most needy, the most individualized support as well. I know Dan mentioned about the homebound instruction, which is really before, we're talking kids were getting 5 hours of a tutor a week when you were home and you were sick. Now you can get full day live instruction every day of the week that you would be in school anyway. Right. But the key is using that technology to provide access points to our kids who might have difficulty at getting it in another way. So we think it's been a great as much as COVID was horrible and a horrible time for a lot of people, there was some good that came out of us figuring out how to navigate that pandemic. And one of the things was using technology to the fullest capability we can in the district. And we see a lot of our kids who are thriving, whether it's they're through their IEP or through their 504 plan, that might need to take a break from the in-person learning and being in school for a period of time. They can access learning at home and still provide their full educational services in their home setting if they need to. So it opened a lot of doors for us to be, to do what we want to do, what's best for kids in a lot of different, learning environments.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I do think that the grand worldwide social experiment that was an awful global pandemic did create some spaces for us to collectively learn as an education community, that things that can benefit us. What drove the decision on the personal device policy, Dan? Was that something that was getting more complicated inside of the schools? Did it kind of come from a grassroots effort, or did you guys just decide at the top, we need to make a decision on this?
Yeah, I shared this. I shared a little bit of this, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way. But having been in education long enough and working, I've been blessed. I've worked at every level of high school all the way down to elementary school. It's the Cabbage Patch card kind of syndrome. When Cabbage Patch cards came out in middle schools, it was out of control. And what are we going to do? We have to ban them. And fidget spinners, we have to ban them. Social media really changed that a little bit differently. And the amount of time kids were spending on a device or being influenced, as all the research will show, by these algorithms or what is happening, what they're being exposed to on these cell phones. We really started to know a significant change, especially out of COVID, with behaviors, interactions with one another, the influence it had on kids, getting into trouble with each other, picking on each other outside of school and making its way into school. And really, we have an unbelievable relationship with our teachers union. We meet pretty regularly. Okay. And one of the things that came up was like, hey, we'd like you to do this. I said, this would mean a lot to you? Okay. We went out there and had a public conversation. We talked to our I run a district-wide home and school. I bring all the home and schools together, and I say, look, this is what I'm going to do. Tell me how horrible this is. What's the best thing that can happen, the worst? A home and school gave me their blessing. We had a public meeting about it. We did a survey about it. And people were like, take it away. Take it away. Remove it from the kids. And I will tell you that it's been an awesome resource that and we told the high school kids, if you don't get your act together and your behaviors don't improve, we'll take it from you. And I've been in meetings with the high school kids where it's like, Dr. McGarry, don't take it away. We're doing better. And I will say, that the typical in-school behaviors that we were seeing have reduced significantly now that we have taken that
Have a policy in place.
off of them. And Ed is the one who put the team together with our other two directors. And Ed could speak to how he navigated that, but he deserves a credit for taking what I wanted to do and just said, "Hey, make this happen." He shepherded the project. So,
and one of the things too, I'm pretty heavily involved in a lot of our very serious disciplinary situations in the district, and I can tell you almost every single one of them had some type of social media involvement. It started somewhere through a text message, through a Facebook post, through an Instagram post, and then evolved into something else that came into the school building, and then spilled over with youngsters who don't understand how to navigate emotions properly, and things got out of hand. So one of the things we talked about, as Dan mentioned, we kind of put the team together, was we're going to over communicate this to our families and start telling kids, hey, it's June 25th. You got 1 hour every day to put your phone away and get used to it. And then every week we gradually add another hour to say that by the time the summer is over, they're putting their phone away for 6 hours a day or 6 hours a week or whatever it was, in preparation for them to come back to the school building and say, this isn't that hard. I could put my phone away and not be so overwhelmed by not having my cell phone. And we felt like it really worked. We got a lot of good feedback from the teachers saying that, hey, those messages really seemed to help with our kids becoming, accustomed to not having their cell phone in their hand all day. So it helped. But I think it was a perfect example of putting people together and with a common, common problem, and then coming down to finding a common goal that everyone was okay with, and everyone worked really hard to make sure we followed through.
Yeah,
families included, teachers included. It was great. It was a great experience.
And when you pull people together and you make a policy because they felt heard, you found it to be incredibly successful in the rollout. And you haven't had to make a policy K-12. Your K-8 policy is driving behavior in 9-12. I love that. That's a great example for people to follow. Do you have a similar thought process or a framework or a policy in place relative to AI? Dan, you mentioned AI in general. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about ChatGPT and cheating and whether does it help or does it not. Have you guys thought about framework or policy for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the top issues that are out there that school districts, and people are very vehement about where they stand on this. I'm not. I was a high school English teacher. I see the value in both. I was somebody who always asked kids to rewrite their paper. If they were willing to rewrite it, I would give them an A. My attitude is writing is not a sign of how bright you are. It's your willingness to get work at it and refine it. And so in many ways, we've taken an approach that these are resources and tools that are out there that you could still put your own spin to it and you could still refine your work. Right. And we have not been a district that's adopted no use of artificial intelligence or ChatGPT unless it's specifically mapped out in that paperwork with the teacher in advance, right, and you're aware of it. But we have not adopted, strict anti-ChatGPT, anti-AI use with students at this point in time in the district. We're working our way through redefining our policy, but our attitude is work with it and not necessarily against it right now in our schools with our teachers and with our kids. Because quite frankly, it's another one of those areas, much like the impact social media has on kids, there are benefits to it, and we're learning with it still. We benefit from the fact that we're right next door to Penn. University of Pennsylvania is right here. And we've had Penn here, who are the experts in just about everything, the University of Pennsylvania, amazing place. We've done professional development with them on working with artificial intelligence and not eliminating it. So we've had a lot of PD with our staff on navigating that.
Okay. No, that's great. Love hearing that. And I do think it's an evolving thing happening right now. All right. Well, we've talked about a lot of different things. We could probably talk for another half an hour about it. I love it. It's been great conversation. Maybe we'll wrap up with just a final question. And this is one where I love to ask people to pull out their crystal balls and kind of give us purview into the future. Just what are things that you are seeing today that you're excited about, that you want to see more in the future? Maybe you don't have to predict the future, or what are some things that you'd like to see less of in the future?
Ed, you want to go first or you want me to go first, buddy? Somebody walked into his office. I'll go first. So
I'll let you finish it out. I'll give it a crack. I'll start with the thing I think I would like to see less of.
Okay.
I think kind of piggyback on what we talked about, the cell phone use. I would like to see less school discipline occurring in our school buildings, preventing students from being engaged in classroom instruction. And I'm saying that coming from a place where I see a lot of it because of the nature of what I do every day is working with students who are in situations that are difficult. But I think with the social media, with what's out there, with the way society is becoming, kind of evolving, I think students are carrying a lot of weight coming into our buildings, and sometimes they don't know how to express themselves properly.
Right.
So I would love to see less of the school violence and the school, shootings and the school, fights and the assaults and things like that we're hearing across the country. So that's what I would like to see less of. I'm excited to see where it's going to go with technology. Okay. I think, what I'm seeing, my own kids, my own personal kids, and what they're doing are things that I did when I was in college myself, on how to navigate learning management systems and how to use a laptop and how to use technology products. So if they're doing that now when they're in middle school, and our kids here in Upper Darby, they're doing that in first grade with their Chromebooks in the classrooms and using Amira and using other, learning, web-based learning systems at home. If they're doing that now, what are they going to be doing in 10 years when they're getting ready to go to college and when they're getting out to start their careers? And what are they going to help be able to create for the rest of the world if they're fortunate enough to be in those positions? So I'm excited to see what is to come with technology.
Okay, great. Dan?
Yeah, I can't help but tell you that I'm an old school guy. I'm attracted to some of the technology that exists. To Ed's point, I think there's positives there. So number one for me, social emotional learning is, I think, here to stay. Okay. I think the value in connecting with people, having an awesome teacher and making a connection with kids is invaluable. I was in front of little kids today, and they ask you so many questions, and I was asking them what they want to be when they grow up, and they want to be a lawyer, or they want to be an NBA star, all these cool questions. And that connection you make with kids, that human connection, and that every kid has a strength, and we have a responsibility to find that strength and push them, and then find their weaknesses and help them refine that. I believe that connection is invaluable. I worry that we're losing a little bit of that as we try to replace certain jobs. I'm reading about totally artificial only schools, AI schools. I do worry about that. I definitely think an adult role model, that human connection is very, very, very important to what we have, and we have to sustain in our school districts and with our kids. I also think from a literacy standpoint, which is the focus of this conversation, there is a connection and an important value that I worry about using a computer, and I'm sure it's probably going to be, listen, one of your listeners might say you're totally wrong, but following a page and turning the page and reading a book, there's a lot of research on how invaluable it is to hold a book and read a book and follow yourself from page to page and the development of the brain in reading that way and learning that way. I worry about not having that connection still. All these online tests that we're giving kids, and I think there's some concern about some of these skill and brain connections that the brain research shows that connectivity has to happen. So hopefully we can find a way still to read a page on a book on a computer and maybe not have to have it. But some of those connections in brain development that we know we've done a lot of research on. I've been in a PBS documentary on the brain and the connections from one hemisphere to the other and how those connections are made. Let's rely on that still. That's where technology is a positive, and put those grassroots, old school skills on, the letter people coming in your room and sounding out the letters and what those sounds are like. I think those skills are still important for us. I hope they don't go away. But to Ed's point, I do think technology is going to be a game changer in education. I just hope it doesn't remove the human connection to kids in classrooms.
Excellent. Okay. Well, you both said it better than I could. I love it. I think it's a great vision of the future. Appreciate you taking the time and joining us today. And hopefully we'll be able to connect again sometime soon.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found today's conversation insightful, be sure to subscribe to Literacy Mindset. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for updates, resources, and to join the conversation. Have a topic you'd like us to explore? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.